Then I got named in a lawsuit, and yeah, the demand was $28 million. And then the thoughts also include, oh my God, where am I going to get $28 million from? And I am going to be front page news in the paper. And everybody is going to think of me as some sort of pariah. And my colleagues are going to think terrible things about me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nate Crannell. Today, we are talking litigation, that pesky L word. The majority of physicians are sued at some point in their career, yet most are unprepared. I'm joined today by Dr. Gita Pensa, who founded doctorsandlitigation.com, a coaching platform to help physicians who are in litigation handle the stress that comes with that experience. She's an attending emergency medicine physician at Brown University Health and Wellness in Rhode Island, while also being an associate professor of emergency medicine at Brown University. On top of all of that, she still makes time to produce and host an impactful podcast called Doctors in Litigation, the L Word. That can be found on Apple and Spotify. Welcome to the show, Dr. Pensa.
Hi, Nate. Thanks so much for having me. You can call me Gita. It's fine.
Gita, perfect. Gita it is. What is going well today?
What is going well today? Gosh, lots of things, really. Like I just finished a podcast an hour ago. I've got some coaching this afternoon. The rain has stopped here in Rhode Island. It's actually a nice, cool day. Like there's a lot of good things today.
There you go. A lot to be thankful for.
Yes, that's true.
That's awesome. Well, so doctors like you, they have a lot on their plate, right? From the time that they enter medical school, residency, years of attending, and then at some point retirement. So even based on your own personal experience that you've had with litigation, you have found that there's a not so unique event that happens with many physicians where they find themselves as a defendant in a lawsuit. So we're going to be talking about that whole experience today. Why is that so common for physicians? And then what are some of the wildest cases you've heard of or been a part of?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So yeah, very, very frequent. I mean, surveys, people tried out data like 30%, 50%, but like the truth is that the grand majority of physicians will be sued during their career, especially if they work in a higher risk specialty. And there are all sorts of articles that doctors can look at as to what's high risk and what's low risk. But virtually any doctor who practices medicine is going to be at risk for being sued for malpractice. Now, being sued for malpractice does not equate with negligence, which is what I think a lot of lay people don't understand. There's this feeling that, well, someone's suing this doctor, and so they must be a bad doctor. But honestly, what tends to happen is because of the way our system works, anyone that has a grievance with the way their care was rendered or had an outcome that they don't like, whether or not the doctor had the agency to change that outcome, or whether or not the doctor acted in a way that was reasonable, but still this bad outcome happened. Anyone with those sorts of grievances, the way that they seek out, I guess you can call it compensation, retribution, whatever, the way they seek it out is through the legal system. And sometimes those suits are justified, and a lot of times they're not, because, what we know is that over half of suits that are filed are dismissed as no pay cases. Like they just don't go anywhere. There's no settlement. There's nothing. They go away. But for the doctor, they feel pretty awful from the time they get served, from the time they get notice. Usually also from the time of the bad outcome. There's a lot of really complex feelings that go along with that. The second part of your question was about crazy cases. Gosh, okay. Most of these have to do with what I was saying, in cases where the physician really did nothing wrong, and yet there was this accusation of malpractice, or a complaint made against them, against the board, for some really, really interesting things. And some of these are just awful. Like they're not like funny. They're always awful. But I'll plug, there's a new documentary that's out. It's called A World of Hurt: How Medical Malpractice fails everyone.
Mm.
And in it, there's a story of a physician who is being sued and winds up, I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but winds up taking his own life.
Mm.
So one suit that I know about where, first of all, he didn't do anything wrong, now that I'm familiar with the case. That doesn't really come out in the documentary. But what is awful is that, and also is not in the movie, is that his wife was also a physician. And so the plaintiff's attorney, after this physician's suicide, decides to keep the wife in it and sue the estate. So now the
Oh,
wife,
jeez.
whose husband just took his own life, has to now be the defendant defending the estate for this plaintiff's attorney. And so, I mean, things happen all the time that just make you, really just, they're just really upsetting. Um, and certainly there are lots of physicians in there. Like in the podcast, you'll hear stories about physicians who saved people's lives, like literally saved their lives. And then they get sued because it wasn't a perfect outcome, or it's just,
Hmm.
there are lots and lots and lots of stories to be told like that, which is, I think, sort of the basic message for a lot of physicians. A basic message that they need to hear is that their experience with the unfairness of this is not singular. Like we feel like we're getting singled out for something horrible or
Sure.
terrible, and this is like our horrible fate. When in actuality, this happens a lot. And for most of the country, it's just business. We don't feel like that. But, to this whole machine, it is. So sorry, long-winded answer to your
No, that was
question, but
good.
obviously I could talk about this all day. Anyway.
For sure. No, that's exactly why I came out the gate asking about the wildest things. I think when you make a statement that says, most physicians will be sued at some point in their careers, vast majority of those are going to be like the boring, you know, nitty gritty type of things that aren't as fun to talk about, right? They're just little tiny cases. You said most, go away non paid, but there are, I think, people hear the word, common people that are not in the healthcare world
Yeah.
hear malpractice. There's a malpractice case. This doctor's being sued. They think of the extreme things. I know I would, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, a doctor was performing surgery and they left a scalpel inside, the patient and sewed him back up, or they were supposed to do surgery on their left hip and they did it on their right hip and
Oh,
completely
yeah.
messed things up for this person. Like just drastic
Yeah.
things that you think from an outcome standpoint drastically change the patient's life. Where to your
Mm-hmm.
point, a lot of these are people are being saved. It's just not at the quality that the patient had expected, or there was one tiny little thing and they're like, you know what, this is kind of bugging me. This is a doctor who makes, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I'm going to go ahead and sue him. And then it becomes a business thing, to your point. And so I think that's
Yeah.
where, from the patient side of things or just the common person side of things, they need to understand that this is not something that is, it's common, but it's not as impactful to the non-healthcare community as they think it is, where most of the impact lies is on the doctor themselves. And I think that's where you can agree. A lot of the emotions and the
Oh,
the
yeah.
impact that a litigation case has, a lot of that falls on the doctor, not on the
Yeah.
patient. The patient's just out
Yeah.
there to try and make right, if I can put that
Yeah.
in quotations.
In the work that I do, there are a lot of themes that come up. And so, I mean, sometimes things do happen to patients and it is the doctor's fault. Like that
Mhm.
also happens. I think that there is also this skewed vision of, you know, so there's this Institute of Medicine report, and I think mostly people are familiar with these papers that say that like healthcare errors are like the third leading cause of death and that kind of thing. And that there's a lot of problem with how we define error. And in
Mm.
these situations, the way error is basically defined is when there is an outcome that basically wasn't the desired outcome. And so
Mhm.
therefore the physician made an unreasonable choice. And that's not how medicine works, right? Like we don't have a crystal ball, but they're equating those things. They're equating like true error and almost negligence by extension with adverse outcomes. And yeah, there are adverse outcomes that does happen, and there are also true errors that does happen. But I don't think we've done a lot of favors to the public by really conflating those things and taking out a lot of the nuance in the discussion about like how does medicine work.
Mhm.
People are always making decisions with limited information, in bodies that, one is very different from the next, and we're making a lot of gray zone decisions all the time, and you can't get those things right all the time. And so for doctors who don't feel like they did anything wrong, this is an unfair system. And for doctors who do feel like maybe they could have done better, there is no other system that leverages that guilt, emotion, all of those really complex feelings that people have when they feel like they let someone down. Um, so there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it,
Yeah,
but I do know that the system that we've got going right now is not anyone's friend.
absolutely. And no one likes to speak for the masses or be the one voice for an entire community, but I think you could agree that most or all doctors want a positive outcome each time they
Mhm.
treat a patient. It's not like they're purposely causing errors or that they're not giving the treatment that should have been given. It's a diagnosis. There's a treatment. They are doing what's best for the patient. And I think maybe sometimes if there is a string of errors that, again, quote with errors, however you define that, they see a string of this in a certain specialty or in a certain type of procedure. Like the doctor wants to get it right every time. Like there's
Sure they
not
do.
there's not
Sure they do.
malintent
And if
there.
you are a proceduralist, like it's the rare true proceduralist who never gets sued. So like if you're a surgeon, if you're someone who does, IR, if you're someone that does procedures, um all those things in the consent form happen at some point, whether, even if you really feel like you did everything right. And sometimes that like it was not a good day. Like that, you know, it really wasn't a good day. And the hard part for us is like a not good day for us usually has impact on someone else. And that's um inherent to the practice of medicine. So we try to minimize those bad days, but I think it's an impossibility to believe that they will never happen, really, for any of us.
For sure. So there's probably, and you kind of hit on it there. There's some specialties that have a higher degree of likelihood. Maybe it is
Hmm.
a proceduralist, a surgeon, things like that have a
Hmm.
higher likelihood of being exposed to
OBGYN. Oh my
litigation.
gosh.
Yeah.
Poor
OB. Yeah.
OBGYN. Like
Is good.
there is, and those cases are always awful, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
an OBGYN, childbirth is fraught, absolutely fraught. And that's why we've made really like, we've gone a long way from the days when, so many women and children died in childbirth. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason that all these old time stories all talk about someone dying in childbirth. It used to happen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And could we be better right now with maternal mortality? Yeah, except that that's a really complex problem, right? But anyway, the public right now is primed in a way that they weren't primed before to really want to blame physicians so as like the perpetrators of these things that are often the result of systemic inequities and access to care and problems with healthcare in general. And I mean, there's a lot that's going wrong in medicine right now, and
Mm-hmm.
the appetite really is to blame. I mean, the doctor's the face of it, right? So that's where you're going to go. So the appetite is to blame the physician for those things, regardless. And the physician usually is the person that feels like, the buck stops with me. And so it's complex.
Yeah. Before we dive in some of these questions that are more around the feelings, the emotions, the process, the positive outcome that comes with the coaching that you do, if we can we talk a little bit about your own experience? So you're a
Sure.
defendant. It said on your website of a $28 million demand case.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
experience then kind of birthed doctorsandlitigations.com, the coaching that you do.
Yeah.
You obviously took the traumatic experience that you were having and turned it into something that can create impact for many others. So tell me a little bit about your experience, and then at the end of that, let's talk about what was that pivotal moment during all of that where you said, "Hey, I think I'm going to take this, and now I want to help my peers get through what they're going through."
Sure. So I was named as a defendant. I was about 5 years out of residency at the time. And it was a case that was really confusing. And I spent a lot of time with this patient. And my record showed I visited her 5 times and examined her, like I re-examined her, like I really thought really hard about this. And she was a young woman and she was an engineer. And and Rhode Island has like no limits on anything, no caps on anything. And so what happened was she wound up having a stroke after I discharged her, and it was not something that I believe I could have predicted. But for a long time, I wondered, like, what could I have done differently? Like, what could I, as I
Yeah. What
really,
did I miss?
yeah, what did I miss? Like, I must have missed something. Like, God, what did I miss? Um, and we spend a lot of, anytime something goes wrong, we spend a lot of time doing that because that's kind of what a human, like a good human does, right? Anytime something awful happens, like that you're anywhere peripherally connected to, like the first thought that sort of a kind person has is like, God, I wonder if there was some way I could have helped that situation. And so when you know that you are like, this person trusted you, this person put their faith in you, like you were supposed to help this person, so you're already coming into it with those feelings. But then I got named in a lawsuit, and yeah, the demand was $28 million. And then the thoughts also include, oh my God, where am I going to get $28 million from?
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to be front page news in the paper. And everybody is going to think of me as some sort of pariah. And my colleagues are going to think terrible things about me. And, you show up in your lawyer's office and the first thing they tell you is, okay, no, don't talk about this with anyone. And it was really heavy and traumatic, and I judged myself a lot for not being able to handle it because as an ER doctor, like what we do is handle things, right? You have some terrible, terrible thing that happens, and then you walk into the next room with a person with a sprained ankle and say like, okay, how can I help you today? Like that's just,
Mm-hmm.
we're sort of trained to do that. And I could not let this go. I had no framework for understanding it. It really changed the way I saw my career and my role. And I wanted to quit and I couldn't quit because I had loans and I had kids and a
Yeah.
mortgage. And I felt really trapped. And, when you start feeling trapped and your identity as a human being is really being assailed, then you might start having some terrible thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, isolation is like just the, you know, it is the thing that often pushes people over. And that's historically what we've done to physicians who are being sued and grappling with these sorts of things that they feel like nobody else understands and they've already been told not to talk about it. So, these things happen. And so um, I went on trial eventually in 2011, and that lasted 4.5 weeks. And I really, my lawyer tried so hard in so many ways to get me sort of propped up to do the job. And I did the job. And I don't have a lot of recollection of doing the job, frankly. Like I've blocked like a
Yeah.
lot of that out.
Mm-hmm.
And we did win. And then I went back to work and I was still miserable. And then they appealed. And I thought the appeal was dumb. And surely someone was going to say, like, no, there's no basis for this. And then yet that went through all the layers of the courts. And then in 2015, my verdict got overturned. And they were like, they called with the news, like, we're scheduling your new trial. And I lost my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I absolutely lost my mind. And at this point, it had been, I saw her in 2006. I was named in 2007, really, I guess. But anyway, a lot of things were leading up to when I was named. But so from 2006 to 2011 was the road to trial one. Then it was 4 more years until 2015. And
Mm-hmm.
all those years, I had been a mess. I was really missing my own life. I was showing up and doing things at work and coming home and sort of phoning it in there unless I was super angry and, bitter. And it was a lot of years. And so then it was, around 2015, and we can talk about this more, but that's when I really realized, like, I gotta fix something here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if I can go on like this. And,
Yeah.
and so that started this, really, it was another 3 years before I went to trial. But during those 3 years, I really tried to make a study of like, how does one do this better? And the answer wasn't to be found in medicine. There was no answer for me. And so I had to look outside of medicine, and learned a lot.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. And so finally in 2018, I went on trial again, and I was like a totally different person by then. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the law. I learned a lot about legal performance. I invited my residents to come watch, all my trainees to come watch me testify in court, because I was really confident. I had participated, I talked about this in the podcast, in like a ballroom dance competition like the week before that for charity. And like I told everybody why I was doing it. It was because I just really wanted to have something positive to focus on while I did this really hard thing. And so trial B was like a totally different experience. But around like a year before that was when I realized, like, oh my God, I think about this so differently now. And I really think that we all should think about this really differently. And there is a way that we could actually change this experience for everybody going forward if we were able to make some changes. So
Yeah.
that's
So
that's that's the story.
that is so traumatic. I'm sorry you had to go through that. That is, I don't know. I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like that wasn't even all the details. That was just a timeline, and I'm like on the edge of my seat for you. But
Yeah.
um,
I mean, just to give you, like, I always tell people, like, I was pregnant with my third kid when I saw this patient. And by the time it wrapped up, she was in middle school.
that's
And
insane.
my kids were teenagers. And it was just like, when you think about how long 12 years is a really long time.
Yeah.
Um, and so, then it was like, oh my God, no time to waste. I
Yeah.
have to start helping people with this.
Yeah. I mean, dollars aside, right? Like not even thinking about 28 million and where's that going to come from, and like what does that do for me for the rest of my life? Because that's one emotion, right? You might be thinking of the financial side of it, but just the psychological side of it. Do you feel like that's 12 years of your life where you weren't your best self, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were that was taken from you, and maybe I don't know if that was the intention of the patient, right? I think that maybe they were just looking for dollars, but like I don't. That was just 12 years where you were not yourself personally with your spouse and your kids, where you were not yourself professionally. Because I mean, I gotta imagine
Yeah.
you just didn't stop working. It's like, oh, I'm being
No, no,
sued.
I
I
kept
gotta
working.
I gotta sit at home. Yeah, so you're putting on a brave face every day. I imagine it's probably in the back of your mind all the time, but you have to put on a brave
Mm-hmm.
face and treat. I gotta imagine in 12 years you're treating thousands of patients
Thousands of
in that
patients.
time
Mm-hmm.
frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think to me that is the most impactful part of that story is that you just had to put on a brave face and continue to treat people for over a decade while trial A and trial B is looming, and then take the personal level, and you have kids that you have 3 kids that you're raising that maybe you just weren't giving your all because again this is just is that a common emotion, like now that you've done coaching and you've worked with many physicians, is that a pretty common emotion that they feel trapped but they are still out in the open surrounded by people?
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so. And that's the isolation piece, right? Because
Hmm.
doctors tend to isolate themselves when something like this is happening, when they're going through something. Like our tendency really is to isolate ourselves, and then someone else has told you, like, now you can't talk about it. And then other physicians, when they hear about the thing, tend to isolate the physician also. And that's just how we've been operating as a culture for a really long time. And all of that contributes to the problem of physician suicide. We do have data to suggest that civil legal problems are a driver of suicide. Doctors have twice the rate of suicide of the general population. And as an occupation, they have the highest rate of suicide in general, higher than the military, higher than, like, anything else that you think of historically. And women actually make up the bulk of that difference. Women in medicine kill themselves at 4 times the rate of the general population. And
Well,
so you can see when you step outside it and you look at this, like, on paper, how that happens. And
mhm.
I'm not saying that, again, like, not every case is one of these soul crushing, um, horrible cases. But even I'll tell you, like, even the little ones tend to really bother people sometimes. Um, and they're asked to perform in ways that they're not used to. They don't know how to. They don't. They're totally unaware of the emotional manipulation that's baked into it. They don't get it. They don't know anything about this planet. It's
Mhm.
another planet that they got to go to, and they can't even tell anyone that they're going there. Like, it's just,
Exactly.
where are you going to get help? Who are you going to talk to? It's just, it's remarkable I mean, this is a terrible thing to say. It's remarkable that like more of them don't take their own lives. Like when you really think about it. Um, and so, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do on a lot of fronts.
I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
You are known as one of the pioneers, I would say, of malpractice litigation stress coaching. When you were going through this, what were some of the resources that maybe you had available or that are still out there aside from your coaching program for people that are in the litigation process? Because if they're having all these feelings, they can't talk about it. Is there, they can't just lean on their attorneys, right? Attorneys are not psychiatrists. They're not behavioral coaches.
Right.
They are not built for that. And I've met a lot of attorneys. So have you. They're all kind of built to sit there. They're not necessarily people person. Right. And so was there resources out there that you could lean on while you were going through all of this, or is what you've created kind of the first snowball that's now getting rolling for people who are going through what you're experienced?
I definitely started building on the work of other people. So first, there were some books. The work of Sarah Charles is really seminal. So Sarah Charles was a psychiatrist who was sued in the 1970s. And then nobody was talking about it. And she was sued in federal court in a suicide case. And then she wrote about it in, I don't remember which book is first, but she had a book called Defendant, which was about her personal experience. And then she started to study it. And then she wrote a book called Adverse Events. I got to make sure I get this right. Adverse Events, Stress and Litigation, I believe. But Sarah, it's Sara without an H. And so if I don't have it quite right, Google it. But I'm pretty sure that's the name of the book. And so I came to those later. I hadn't heard of her. Someone gave me a book called When Good Doctors Get Sued somewhere in there during the latter half, and I'd never read it. I would look at the title. I liked the title because it made me feel like, oh, I guess, good doctors do get sued. Maybe I could still be a good doctor under there somewhere. And then one of the first things I did when I had my sort of, I call it my Scarlett O'Hara moment, when I was like, I'll do this, but like God is my witness, I will never be like this again. And that was the first thing I did, was read that book. And it made me realize like, oh, because I'd never done like one self-help thing, never did therapy, never did like, I was trained as like an old school doctor. Like, even though I don't look like an old school doctor, I was trained by old school doctors. And the way you practice medicine is, there's a lot of stuff in the books that you learn, but most of how you model yourself as a physician is based on the doctors who trained you. And I was old school. And so no therapy, no help, no nothing. And those books really opened it just sort of made me aware that there may be things that I hadn't learned actually that could be able to help me, that other people might understand better than me. And that was a hard thing to swallow. So
was this in the latter half of your, the latter half of your 12-year experience?
For sure. I'd say the last 3 years or so. I want to mention Louise Andrew. She is a MD-JD who has been writing about this. I didn't know about her at the time. And has been coaching and stuff. Well, I think she calls it mentoring, but she has been, helping physicians in this arena for a long time. And so there had been, not a lot of work. No, I'll say that. And I had to dig to find it. And someone just sort of mentioned like, oh, you're doing this work now. Have you heard of this person? Have you heard of that? And I hadn't. And my hospital didn't have like a peer support program. Some places do, but the larger hospital in our community did apparently have one, but that was never offered to me. So I wasn't starting from scratch, but I was starting with not a lot.
Sure. Yeah, and you've said before in the past that you dove into everything from tort law to legal performance techniques to cognitive neuroscience, behavioral therapy. Like, was a lot of this, and you kind of touched on it there, like, was a lot of this self-research where you're going out and in your free time that you did have and where you're trying to still battle with all the emotions, was this
Yeah.
self-research, or did you enlist, were you sitting down and talking with attorneys, psychologists, other coaches
All
during
of
the
the
latter half of
above.
your experience? Okay.
All of the above. I was getting therapy and I got coached. I was interviewing and talking to, before the podcast, um, psychologists and attorneys, and then they all came and did interviews for me in the podcast. I'll tell you, if there's one thing a doctor is good at, it's studying and learning. Like, that's what we do. So when I decided, like, I gotta learn everything, like,
Yep.
yeah, a lot of it was just like, I mean, and again, the answers aren't within medicine. The answers are outside of medicine, frankly. But studying it with an earnestness of someone who was studying, like, for medical school, like going to those resources and, studying them as though they mattered just as much to me as, the Krebs cycle or whatever stuff I had to learn as a med student. And it took it took a degree of humility and I'll use that word earnestness, like, that I had not had. I didn't have it for, a lot of years in this. And that was help resistance, and that was arrogance, and that was just believing that I had to / did have all of the answers. And maybe you do have to get to sort of a rock bottom place before you can say, like, I don't have all these answers. I don't know all these answers. And then somehow decide that you want to find the strength to look for some and
Absolutely.
to look for direction outside of yourself.
Yeah. Let me ask you a tough question.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Those that can see this on video, she braces herself a little bit there.
Okay.
If you would have gone out and found those resources, did the learning, did the studying, consulted with the psychologists, year one of your experience. So now we're talking 2007, maybe 2011 once the trial started. Let's say 2011. How would that have changed the framework of how you practiced on a daily basis? How you would have conducted yourself, maybe handled and managed some of those emotions that you were feeling for so many years? If you would have found those resources early on in your process, how do you think that would have changed the subsequent 8 or 9 years after that?
Well, when you learn in the legal world about hypotheticals, you have to answer them. But I would say, honestly, it would have changed a lot for me if I were open to that early on. I think that there was a lot of suffering that I might have been spared. I have compassion for that person that was suffering because she didn't know any better. But if somehow she did know better, and I suspect she would have done better. And so, I think a lot of regrets that I have from those years. I think perhaps maybe we could have averted those. I don't know. But I certainly think that I would have spent a lot less time really mired in anxiety and depression and just hating medicine. Like, I needed to make peace with practicing medicine. I couldn't do it for a long time. Or I had to leave it. Like, and so part of actually how I started podcasting and that kind of stuff was that around that time, 2015 or so, I made this conscious decision of, like, I got to figure out how to like medicine again. And I joined an academic faculty. That's when I joined Brown. And it was a convenient time because our little hospital was getting gobbled up by other hospitals and all that kind of stuff. And so then I presented myself to the residency director and was like, I think I want to teach, but I don't know. I don't have a niche. Like, I just practice medicine. Like, what can I do? And she told me that they needed, like, an educational technology, social media person. And I didn't know anything about that, but I was like, all right, I'll try. It sounds interesting.
I'll learn.
Yeah, I'll learn. And so, so I started learning and things like that. So I I think a lot of things would have changed for me, but then, maybe I wouldn't be doing this work. I don't know. And I
Yep.
find this work really fulfilling and exciting. And I'm in my 50s now, and I'm stepping away from like active emergency medicine practice and trying to do more urgent care and health and wellness and that kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't know that this would have become what now feels like the singular focus of my career.
Sure.
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Right. So
It's a double-edged sword, right? It's the good, the bad that came with it. There's obviously
mm-hmm.
that silver lining and kind of the pot at the end of the rainbow, if you will, of what came from this and the
Right.
experience you had. If you didn't have all those emotions, all those feelings, have the experience that you did without the resources,
Right.
you wouldn't then know how to coach to other people who are experiencing it. So I'd asked you that question earlier, just as a thought of kind of to get you thinking about it, but also anyone who's listening that is maybe just getting into the litigation process. They were just named as a defendant, or they've been going through it and they're in their first couple of years of that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Being
And that's the truth of
open
it.
to finding the coaching. Yep.
It does not have to be how you expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever thoughts you have in your head about what this should be, about how you should feel, like none of those things have to be your reality for long anyway. But yeah, that took a long time for me to figure out.
Yeah. And in your coaching, and again, I'm talking to the people who are going to be listening to this, that are thinking, okay, I'm in litigation right now. This is why I'm listening to this podcast. Talk about some of the emotions that they are probably feeling, and then some of the techniques, or I don't want to call them therapies, but like the techniques or the therapies that you're providing to people that are in a litigation process to help them overcome some of those challenges that they're feeling, some of those deep feelings that they're having.
Right. Now, some of this will always depend on the context, but there are always themes, right? And so one physician that I talked to early on who did make a mistake, they described it, I asked them to tell me how they're feeling. They described it as heartbreak. It felt like heartbreak. But they broke their own heart, is the way they put it. There is a lot of fear and anxiety around what's going to happen in the process because they don't know anything about the process. And so there's a lot of anticipatory anxiety because people don't understand, what this means, how to show up. They just don't have any reference for that at all. And so part of that is working on skills, like actually working on like some actual foundational knowledge about like, this is how this works, and this is what's expected of you. And this is how one becomes a good defendant. And people come into it thinking that it's a bad thing to be a good defendant. And I don't know why we would think that when this is like integral to our practice, like, litigation is kind of woven into everything. Why would you not want to be good at it? So pushing it back against these kind of, and I do a lot of thought work. So people, giving people like the skill to be able to segregate their thoughts and feelings from facts of situations, learning how not to let their rage or anxiety or sadness or feelings of guilt or remorse, how to not let those feelings actually drive the bus when you are in deposition or at trial. Or there are things that you're going to be asked, they're like theaters or performance that you're going to be asked to come and, do your thing in. And
so learn your lines.
Yeah. I mean,
Is
it's
it really?
not right. That's not the arena to process all of these feelings. Those things it does have to get done. Like there is a lot of, heavy duty emotional slogging, psychological slogging to go through, and there's no way to avoid it. There's no way to avoid it. Like this whole, like, it's just business. Like, don't think of it like that. Doesn't work for most caring, thoughtful physicians who went into this because they wanted to help people. It doesn't work for them.
So are you teaching them to kind of compartmentalize some of those emotions, to say, hey, I know you're having these, but don't bring them out while you're in the middle of answering a question in court.
Yeah, it's easier
that's not
said
the time
than
to
done.
do it.
So it's not, you can't just tell people to, like, it's like telling someone like, well, just calm down. Like when they're upset, like that doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so the reason that like this happens over time, like I can't just go into them like a week before their deposition and be like, look, I just want you to be like calm, cool, collected, and X, Y. That doesn't work.
That's what the attorney will tell them to do.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, and it's usually adequate enough because the physician's pretty good at taking like direction. But they could be a lot better off if they started a lot earlier in terms of like really deep down deciphering like what we make an event like that mean and what it actually means. And so like, no, the deposition is not the place. It's really not like for you to try to get out of your case. That's not what the deposition is for. There's no judge in there. Like that, the plaintiff's attorney is not interested in letting you out. They're just interested in the crafting theory. So like, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing there. People want it to be like, let me just explain what happened. And then they're going to let me out of this thing. That's not what it's for. So actually like really educating people is part of it, of like, this is how you do this. This is what this means. This is what it does not mean. And that kind of work actually takes a little bit of time. So I'll tell you one other thing that I'm doing right now is that I just started because there's this like didactic component to my coaching, which differs from other types of coaching. So I'm like a coaching mutt because I'm part mentor as someone who's been through an experience and can model some things. And I'm part coach because we do a lot of thought work and question and answer and that kind of stuff, and sort of guiding people to really understanding why they think the way they think about certain things and how those things do or do not serve them. And then I'm an educator because I got to educate them about like what this is and what this isn't. True coaching feels like the person has all the answers inside. Yeah, these people don't have those answers inside. They're not there. Like they need knowledge. And so I decided to try to create a course out of it that isn't just like, here's the anatomy of a lawsuit, but more of a real all-encompassing skill set mindset kind of thing. And I just launched it. I did 8 weeks of this for an insurance company. And they helped by they helped me get survey data basically. And it was highly successful. It was really highly successful. And I'm really excited about that. And so now thinking about ways to bring that out to the larger audience is something that I'm super interested in. I'm hopefully going to be doing this for like another insurance company too. I'm doing sort of ongoing I call it a program. And the name of the program is LEAP, which stands for Litigation, Education, and Performance. So it's not all about like, oh, do you need help? Oh, do you need support? This is about like actually grabbing your situation by the horns, learning what it is that you're supposed to do, dealing with the emotional impact of all of it, including the adverse event, and then figuring out how do I use this as a catalyst to not only do as well as I can in my case, but also like course correct for the rest of my life, like everything that's going on in my life. How do you do that? And I think those things, because I know they can be learned, I feel like they can be taught. So that's what I'm going to try to do now.
That is very cool. That's going to have such an impact on so many people. It's just a different angle. I like how you said you're kind of a mutt in this space.
I am.
You know so many things. You say that, but do you follow football at all?
Oh,
a little bit.
No, I mean, a little bit, yeah.
Okay. I want to give you an analogy because this is what I'm hearing from you as far as how you are an impact for people, and I think this is really important. In football, everyone thinks the head coach is like makes all the decisions. Every player is like following whatever the head coach says. That's not accurate. Each team has position coaches. It's like there's a quarterback coach, there's a running back coach, there's a defensive coordinator. They're more specialized in whatever position that player plays. For you're kind of like the quarterback. Telling someone here's the anatomy of a case is like giving them the playbook to say, hey, here's all the plays that our team runs and here's how it goes, right? You're more of the quarterback coach in that you're on the field during practice, standing with the quarterback, talking to them about techniques, talking to them about little changes that they can make, but then also talking them through the emotions and the instincts that they need to have while playing. Like you can't put instincts down on a piece of paper and say, hey, here's how it is. It has to be conversational. And so you're kind of like that quarterback coach you're not the head coach that just says, hey, here's the playbook, everyone learn it, and then you guys we're going to go win games. You're the quarterback coach that's there to refine and create the outcome that you want for that quarterback. And a lot of that is instinctual. A lot of football is instincts, and there is emotion that comes behind it. And so I think you're kind of that coach that's right there, standing right next to him to say, hey, here's what you got to think about in certain situations. And now it's time to go out and perform. And then as you perform, we'll make little tweaks and and turns along the way.
I love
Does
that. Yeah.
that make sense?
That's the heart of coaching, really. I mean, and that's what differentiates it from like therapy and support and all those things which absolutely have their role. But the role of the coach is to sort of help to watch what you're doing and help you see what you're doing, and then help you refine that. Like, and what we're working with mostly are your thoughts, but also how do those thoughts impact my performance? How do I want to show up here? What is the quote unquote right way for me to show up? What is the most helpful way that I can show up with integrity, and feel good about my performance here, and just sort of leaving it all out on the field, basically. That's it in a nutshell.
Very cool.
Thanks.
When should someone, if someone's listening to this and they say, hey, I'm going to get a hold of Gita, at what point during that process should people be reaching out to you? And maybe that's very vague.
It's all over the place. I think
Okay.
early is better. I really do. I work with a lot of people right after adverse events too. Like, they find me, they know they're struggling, they anticipate a lawsuit, and they'll find me then, and we can get them to where they need to be in that moment. I've certainly had people who've come back several times. Like, I don't have a lot of people who just do like perpetual ongoing coaching. Usually it's like 8 weeks, and then they get to a place of sort of like, okay, like I can do this. But then I might see them again before deposition. And then I've had a few experiences now where I've gotten to see them before trial. I do say those are physicians who find me on their own. Insurance companies and defense attorneys find me often. And I am encouraging them, like when I speak to those groups, I really encourage them to find me earlier, because a lot of times they'll pull me in as like this sort of Hail Mary at the end,
hey, another football analogy. Look
another
at you.
football analogy, right? Like, this doc is not going to do well on the stand, and everyone's panicking. Like, oh, let's call Gita and see if she can talk to them. Like, that is not the time. That's not how I really work. And so the time for that was like 6 months before that. Because I mean, a lot of this is, thought work especially takes practice, and it takes repetition, and it takes, it really takes time. It takes time to change the way you think about something, and to show up in a different way for something. And, trying to last minute that is not ideal for me. That's just how I work. I know there are other witnesses coaches that do, like performance, like, legal performance, and a lot of them are lawyers that do that differently. And my primary interest is in the well-being of the defendant, and then getting them to, that actually usually leads to better outcomes in terms of their performance and how they're able to handle things.
It has to, right? If their well-being and their mental clarity is on point going into it, the outcome just has to be better than if they're going in there just an absolute wreck and scattered thoughts and emotions. And so, people need to find you before the season even starts, right?
That's right.
To your point, don't call me 2 hours before the first game and say, hey, I don't know how to play football. Please help me. So, no, I think that's good advice. But I always like to end my show with the same question. What do the next 5 years look like for Dr. Gita Pensa?
Gosh, that's a great question. I have no idea. I'm still going to be practicing medicine, I think, trying to do that like a couple of days a week. And I really want to get this stuff out there. I'm being very thoughtful and deliberate about how I do that. But I want to, I'm working with someone to get CME for video courses. I want to bring LEAP, again, litigation, education, and performance. I want to bring that to more insurers, to a wider audience. I'm just starting to figure all that stuff out now, but the first thing is done. It's whole proof of concept that I had. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm really pumped, actually. And to a person, everybody in this program was like, we just need all the defendants to take this. And that made me feel amazing. And so, I'm hopefully in the next 5 years, it's just me laying the groundwork to get this out there. Because I have a very, very deep desire to change the way that we do this.
Yeah, you're an amazing human being. I can already tell. Just as a person, you're great. But as a doctor, I'm sure you're fantastic. As a coach, you're amazing.
I appreciate that.
I'm glad I got the pleasure to take some time out of your day for you to sit down and
Nate,
talk with me.
This has been so fun. Thank you.
Absolutely. So people can find you doctorsinlitigation.com. Obviously, if you just Google Dr. Gita Pensa,
Yeah.
you're going to find all our stuff out there. So
And if you
I
want
used
to
to have
find
people
more
plug.
about Leap, I'm going to start putting some information about that. I'm trying to get a newsletter going, and that's leap-coaching.com.
Awesome.
There's like a baby
Well,
website there, but you can sign
there
up
you go.
for the
Little
newsletter.
sub website. I like that. Well, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day, and I look forward to when our paths cross again in the future.
Oh, thank you so much.
Take care.